Thank you. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ed. Before you would even complete the sentence, he would be thanking you because you were 100% correct. And I laughed so many times when you did that. I'm sure it's done it for all of you. And I just want to tell you that you may be wondering, as I'm wondering, what was he thinking? He always had a way compliment for everybody else, whether joke, whether comment on whatever he was reading, whatever the issues of the day were. What was he really thinking? He was thinking of you and me and his family and everybody else. So, I'll be back at the end because they know I know how to clear a house. Even better than I know how to keep it. Thank you for now.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Palucci, and we are all here to celebrate the extraordinary life of Eugene McCarthy. My friendship with Eugene was the result of some amazing coincidences which had to be guided by the hand of the good Lord. Back in the mid-'70s, I moved to a town called Situate, Massachusetts, and was working for the Gillette Company at the Prudential Building in Boston. One morning I went to work and learned that the company had hired a new director of security, whose office was a couple of doors down from mine. Once I got settled into my office, I decided to introduce myself to the new guy. Thus started an amazing set of coincidences mentioned earlier. In talking with the new guy, I asked where he was living, and he said, Situate, Massachusetts. And I said, wow, what a coincidence. I live in Situate. What street do you live on? And he said, Vernon Road. Wow, I live on Vernon Road. What number are you? He said, something like 120. I said, Gene, I live right across the street from you. And at that point, it was like everything meshed together. And we became good friends. And we would often talk about the Red Sox, of course, and sometimes the Boston Bruins, our hockey team. And most of this was in light of what they were doing for a record in terms of what the management was doing to improve the team. And Gene was always a stickler for getting the right people to do the right thing in the right places. And this went on probably for the rest of our friendship. One day at the start of the summer, Gene asked me if I wanted to help him coach Little League with Eric's baseball team. And I said, sure. If you want me to, I'll be glad to help. And we had a wonderful time with the kids. They were all wonderful. And he really loved coaching and watching Eric and the other boys play. And occasionally we would talk about the coaching and how to try different things as a coach to try and win the game and improve the play of all the kids that were there. Gene was very enthusiastic about all the hobbies and sports that the children played, whether it be swimming, or soccer, or baseball. As time went by, Gene changed his employment from Gillette to R.J. Reynolds as Director of Security. and moved to Winston-Salem. We continued our friendship via telephone, mostly updating each other on family happenings and what the children were doing, what sports they were playing, and how they were doing in school. Gene was especially proud that his three of his children decided to follow him into the FBI and into government service. That was kind of the pinnacle of his fatherhood to these children, I guess. Gene and I were both rabid Red Sox fans and Bruins fans, and spent much time evaluating the players and the coaches for these teams. Even though meeting each other was highly coincidental, it was not the only coincidence in our lives. About 11 years ago, my wife and I decided to purchase a home in South Carolina. And it was in a golfing community. And then about 6 years ago, Gene mentioned to me that a good friend of his, Dr. Jim Patty, had also moved to Calawassie Island. And that he behooved me to go and introduce myself to him. He says he's a very extraordinary guy. And I did that and became good friends with Jim for the 6 years remaining of his life that he spent in Calawassie. On occasion, Gene would relate some unbelievable finish to a golf tournament or a golf match that he won. And I would reply that it was not luck but ability. Gene had a fantastic ability to play golf, and especially in match play, to win the match. And he would always be telling me this about how much money he won. And I asked him if he was reporting it on his income taxes. One of the conversations Gene and I had was that he and Harriet were trying to adopt 3 boys from Russia. Quite a feat at his age, I said. But as usual, Gene and Harriet rose to the occasion and loved being parents, bringing up boys. It seems that Gene and I were destined to meet and become lifelong friends. My memories of Gene will always be of a man devoted to his family, his country, and his God. And in closing, I just wanted to ask Eric if he happened to know where my winter snow shoveling is.
Hello, I hope you can hear me all right. I'm Mike Rubin, one of Gene's friends, and I'm honored to be here celebrating his life, seeing his family.
You can manipulate it.
Oh, wow, that's technology. And sharing our memories of Gene. I don't know if you'll recall, but last Sunday his obituary appeared in the Winston-Salem Journal. It was Sunday, July 8th. Later that day, the Boston Red Sox beat the Yankees at Yankee Stadium to win a rubber game of a 3-game series. And I said to myself, is this a coincidence? Is this a reward for a life well lived? Or is it ordained? Anyhow, that has come up repeatedly since then. The Yankees lost again yesterday, 2-1 to extra inning Red Sox. Gene was a Yankee hailing from Northampton, Massachusetts, the son of a city bus driver who also coached his various sports team, was a respected baseball umpire, and participated in local politics and served on the school board. Gene attended these schools. We graduated from the prestigious in-town prep school, Deerfield Academy, where he was a terrific athlete in baseball and basketball. He always seemed a little embarrassed about Deerfield and those opportunities, and accused of being a preppy, but he sort of got over that. He then attended close by the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, where he played baseball. And one recent year, he was at an alumni function of some kind on the campus, and he bumped into Jack Welch. I don't know if y'all remember that name. He was the CEO and board chairman for General Electric. Had kind of a sketchy past, but he was very influential in American business, corporate business. And he said to Gene, or vice versa, we did okay for a couple of small town Irish kids. And basically he was right. Gene lived an amazing life. He grew up a big fan of the Red Sox. And that was dominated in the old days, in the 30s and 40s, by Ted Williams, and Don DiMaggio, Johnny Pesky, later Jackie Jensen, Carl Yastrzemski in our era. But they were denied a World Series championship since the famous trade of Babe Ruth to the Yankees in 1919. Since that time, they have recovered in a great way, winning numerous World Series, pennants in World Series. Gene kept up his relationship with the Bo Sox and the Celtics with a subscription to the Boston Globe that has followed him most everywhere. After graduating from the University of Massachusetts, and I'm sure his family's going to go through this in detail, he had a remarkable career in serving his country. He attained the rank of sergeant after he graduated from college in what he called the Brown Shoe Army, which took him to Korea. After the Army, he followed a career in national security, counterterrorism with stints in the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI. He demonstrated an aptitude for foreign languages and assigned to the Defense Language Institute in the late 60s, concentrating on Chinese and Russian. These are hard languages. Following his government service, he developed a career in corporate security and with heavy hitters like Levi Strauss in San Francisco, Gillette in Boston, and RJR, which brought him to Winston-Salem in 1978, from which he retired in 2004. I developed a relationship with Gene, initially as my patient, and then as a friend, and one who introduced me to golf. He also, I didn't realize, was such a polymath and had been well read in most everything. And we'll go into that in a second. But my experience with golf and Gene was, he was a wonderful coach. He taught skills, and I'm probably his only favorite. But his enthusiasm for sports enabled his golf friends and partners a unique appreciation and participation in what I found out to be a very social pastime. I recently found a letter hidden away in a book that Gene shared with me, and probably wasn't even aware of. It was tucked in somewhere from probably one of his Wilshire golf mates. And in the letter, he praised Gene as a great golfer and a great friend and a nice guy, with the ability to separate men from their wallets. As both as a testimony of his skills and the good nature of his friends. Gene was this polymath, avid reader who shared his vast library with me, and with its emphasis, of course, on sports, but also history, politics, and special biographies, and of course, a lot of spy stuff was in the literature that he gave me. This activity became the linchpin for enjoying my retirement. It would start with a knock on the front door. Gene would be on his way up to the club to play golf. He would say immediately, "I only have 15 minutes. And, I'd look at Gene, and he'd be holding 3 books, and he'd be tastily dressed with his weathered Boston Red Sox cap on. And I knew it wasn't going to last 15 minutes. He said, "I thought you'd be interested in this." And our conversation would evolve for at least the next hour and a half of great conversation, shared ideas, scandals and heresies, everything from Pete Rose to the NIL. And I'm sure everybody has an opinion on that. Gene was also a unique wife partner, and had a unique wife partner. And he was fortunate. And she encouraged Gene, Harriet encouraged Gene to enjoy his friends and activities while she created a beautiful house and a garden, which annually hosted the butterfly migration. Gene was also that rare butterfly who made all our lives fuller and richer. We're sad to see him go, but we know where he is, and I'm sure we'll be keeping track of it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Not sure I can follow that, but I'm here to tell you I'm one of the recipients of Gene's ability to separate men from their wives. Both as an individual who gave him money, and I'm proud to say that he and I are a great team. We've done our share of fleecing together. We met at a time in both of our lives when we needed a type of friendship that was a little different. I haven't had to endure anything that's going to take my life, but I have had 26 surgical procedures since 1998. A lot of those involved joint replacements that Gene saw me through, and was amazed at the fact that I would come back to play so quickly after the operation were over. And one of the first times we met, we were involved in it was a game show. For those of you who aren't familiar with golf, and when a group gets together to play and we have a team, we refer to that as a game show. And you have the ability to win a bet for the first 9 holes, the second 9 holes overall. And if you've got the best score on a hole of everyone playing, you'll win what we call a skin or a scat. I'm also here to represent the family from Wilshire. Little golf course on the southeast of town, family owned. Been there since 1967. I started playing there in 1972. The Beach family have so many friends in this community. It's unreal. Gene fell in love with that place simply because when you walk in the door, Olive Garden says we're all family here. Well, at Wilshire, you are family. Whether you want to be or not. I played there yesterday. we had some folks who had never been to the course before. They came in just as I was getting ready to play, and you would have thought that Tim and Todd had known those folks their entire life. It's that kind of atmosphere. And, there's so many things that Gene and I talked about that just never related to golf. And there were some people who regretted the fact that they would have to play behind us. I generally walk. I'm 76. Gene was about 76 when we first met. And so now I'm at that age when I was just tremendously impressed with an old guy who could play. And our last round of golf was just, during the winter, in January, when I had surgery on my hands. And even then, as much pain and discomfort as he was having, we managed to enjoy the rounds just as if it were 13 years ago. What a tremendous character. And what a tremendous talent. I read that obituary. It only made me wish I had known him 40 years ago. What a class act. And I also need to share with you, I've gone around for the last 3 or 4 weeks asking different people around the golf course about me, what they might say. It's just, I bet I heard, great guy, gracious, intelligent. But the thing that stuck out the most, I heard from numerous people, Gene McCarthy would make you feel important because he wanted to know about you. It was never about him. I don't know if any of you, well, I know some of you know who Mookie Betts is. I don't know if Gene ever hated one person in the world or not, but he sure has a lot of harsh feelings towards that gentleman. Only because he left Boston. As Gene and I would talk, it would just, a lot of people would think we were talking about golf. No, we just had a mutual appreciation for our own abilities. I'm not great, well above average, and good enough that he looked at me one day and said, I think we'd be a pretty good pair. So we teamed up for several tournaments, and we've done quite well. And not just at Wilshire, we played outside of Wilshire. There was another group of folks I played with quite a bit on Wednesdays. And here, the gentleman who gets that together, his name's Eddie Streeter. He wanted me to, let you know how much he appreciated me. What a great guy. And Todd and Tim, of course, and I've only met, the only child in that survey. And, the boys of Wilshire, they speak highly of you, and really, hope the whole family know that you're welcome there anytime. The types of friendships that come from playing golf. If you don't play golf, a lot of people think it's just a stupid game. Well, it is. I mean, it really is a stupid game. It'll break your heart. It'll kick you around. And the next morning you get up more enthused to go play than you were the day before. I can't explain it. Once you're hooked, you're hooked. The last year or so, when things really got, difficult, Gene was really struggling. There were 2 or 3 times we'd be playing. He'd look at me and he said, Donnie boy, I just don't have it today. I said, but that's okay. preaching, I can't tell you how humbled I am by being right here. You know, Frank Morris, another gentleman sitting right back here, he's played quite a bit of golf with Gene. You know, he and I were just sharing some thoughts, and you know, it's the camaraderie that comes from being that close to someone, doing something that you dearly love, is truly amazing. I sent Harriet a couple of pictures this morning. Gene and I talked about trying to get Harriet and my wife together. My wife has 14,000 square feet of flowers and shrubs. That's a lot. That's her passion, like Harriet's passion for gardening. Also know you're a great cook. You know, we talked about a lot of things. And I'm only going to echo thoughts about how proud he is of that family. I couldn't name you if I had to. But I know about you. I know your accomplishments. I know the pride that he's had in everything you've done. And I know you're proud of your father. I couldn't help it. I'd like to share with you, and I asked Carrie to come and do this. She and I have exchanged some notes here the last several weeks. And she made this one note I found to be extremely heartwarming. And for all of us in here, I want you to think, when I read this, I want you to think just how important your relationship is with your spouse and your family. This speaks volumes of how fortunate that this family has been. It speaks volumes and gives advice for all of us. I'd written her a note, you know, hoping I wasn't imposing on, you know, inquiring about Gene. And she said, "You won't impose. We have had a wonderful life together and started out with a powerful love affair. Most folks aren't as lucky as we've been. I'm happy to share him. He's a keeper. And as long as I have my intact brain and can think of him, he will still be with me. If there is a hereafter, I will find him, probably playing baseball in some celestial park, where I'll sit in the stands until he notices that I'm there, and we'll pick up right where we left off." Thank you for sharing it with us.
Sapiens est potens. Wisdom is power. And when I think about that maxim today, I think that was Gene's motto. It was his mantra, and now it's his memorial. Let me tell you how I met him. I was in the fitness center over at the club one morning about a decade ago, and he was circling me and finally approached me, and he said, "I know who you are and I know what you do." And in spite of that unceremonious, unprepossessing introduction, we became friends, and we were somewhat neighbors
years, and I would see him down on the Greenway walking Finn. I had a dog also named Phineas Finn. So thinking of the trot novels, he thought I might be a suitable subject for further education. And just like Dr. Rubin dropped a book on me at my house one day, and we started exchanging books. And while I gave him a little shrimpy 280-page PT Deuterman Potwater, he would drop these nonfiction, political, military histories on me, 600, 700, 800 pages long. There was an endless supply of these books. As we read and talked about the books, we got to know each other better. Ended out talking about Guadalcanal or Midway. He just had an extensive knowledge of history from which I benefited greatly. And he would also tell me about his life as a G-man. He gave me the blue G-man. We both agreed that J. Edgar Hoover was not our favorite guy. But he would tell me about some of his experiences when he interviewed Henry Ford II up in Michigan. And I'm sure there was a whole room full of private attorneys there to defend him. But just as when he approached me in the fitness center, if you knew him, he had fists like clubs, and he was wearing neutral, and he had that simian stance. I'm sure that's what he adopted there when he walked in and saw Mr. Ford and said, "I know who you are, I know what you did." We would also talk about his experiences elsewhere in Manhattan. He braced one day a Russian espionage agent. He said, "You'll either bring me what I need by tomorrow, I'm coming for you." And I expect that the poor Russian Ruski did comply with whatever request he made at that point. More than that, he was a friend that we could talk with each other about in terms of our own life experiences and circumstances. Yes, I learned how he met Harriet as a true romance, and how she was the love of his life. He knew about his children, and his dogs, and his cat. And he just kept swamping me with books, which I could never overcome. He gave me a bodyguard of lives one time, which was about 800 pages to take on a trip. Fortunately, it was a paperback. It was damaged. I came home, I brought it back in 400 pages. And he didn't back. And so he was really a great mentor for me. And I was foolish enough one time recently to run for public office. And in doing so, there were times when I became a little fed up with name-calling, lies, threats. Other than that, the campaign was fine, but I would talk to him about it. And he would comfort me, basically telling me to ignore it all. I will tell you, I know for a fact that Eugene was not in the same political party that I was. And I expect on the political spectrum that our views may have been quite different, but the beauty of it was that we could talk with each other in an intelligent fashion and reason towards some pretty real common solutions to a number of socioeconomic problems. And it occurred to me, well, I wonder if everybody in this country could be like Gene. Maybe we could be a lot better off today than we are. And I miss him, and I will value the time that I had with him. And I will leave you with this Latin phrase, Resquiesca, Tachi, Awe, Ake, Wale.
I'm going to do my best here. I'm prepared. So as my husband John said to me recently, anyone who met our father just once knew what a kind person he was. How he had a very special way of bonding with you and making you feel interesting and important as he extracted your life story. And anyone who read his tribute knows what an amazing career he enjoyed, spending distinguished service to country and successful service in corporate America. So I won't talk I call a genetically engineered love of carbohydrates. The sweeter, the better. There was no loaf of bread, mound of cinnamon-dusted pastry, or lump of a roll that he didn't devour. His nickname among the Korean waitstaff while stationed overseas was literally 4 rolls, because he always ate 4 rolls with every meal. He once roused me from a deep teenager's sleep on vacation by wafting a box of glazed donuts under my nose and laughing with my siblings when the tactic worked and I bounded out of bed ready for action. He was deeply, terribly upset when our Aunt Caroline ate his last precious apple fritter that he hoarded and that mysteriously vanished overnight. I'm going to paraphrase his language, but with initials, but "Who ate my GD apple fritter?" he yelled out with real anger until he realized it was his sister-in-law, not one of his kids, and that he pretended he wasn't upset. But we all knew he really was. Well, I think it's safe to say that he was a very patient man. Daddy was also known for swift bursts of temper that once they struck, blew over, and then he tried to mask with witty colored commentary and self-deprecating humor. Like the time I had a gigantic splinter embedded in the bottom of my left foot that I wouldn't let anyone touch. My parents had to trap me on my bed and pin me down like an animal, so Daddy could wield his tweezers and remove it. Of course, I used my long legs, which were very strong from the swim team at the time, to kick out at everyone, and I may have accidentally struck his ribcage. And apparently he was recovering from a broken rib, and the furious, again, forgive me, but he was known for this phrase, "Sweet Jesus Christ, hold it down," roared across the room. Once the splinter was removed, he told me I had unerring targeting skills, and that was a good strategy. Then there was the time my sister Alyssa and I were playing house inside on the steps in Winston-Salem. And somehow, don't ask me how or why, she got her head stuck between the banister railings and couldn't get it out. Eric and Caroline were home, and one pushed while the other pulled. But then they quickly disappeared when we all heard Daddy's car in the driveway. So imagine what he thought when he entered, exhausted, and saw his youngest daughter's head mounted on the wall like an animal trophy. "GD, Alyssa, what have you done now?" flew out of his mouth before he calmly problem-solved a way to extract her head safely. "Sweet Jesus Christ, they caught me," he yelled at us once when the police pulled him over for speeding down the highway on vacation. He'd been blasting some British military cavalry bugle calls on a tape cassette in the car, making us laugh by rolling down the front window. He was literally brandishing, I guess it was his left arm, like a saber. And of course, he accelerated the car and got 90 miles per hour in his excitement, entertaining us, and then had to tap dance his way out of that one with the officer. "You think I was outside flapping my GD guns, girls," he told us irritably when we asked if he did something wrong. "That's an expensive ticket." If you knew him, you knew there was no sport he didn't love, and that he carried literally decades worth of sporting equipment with him in the trunk of his car. He had about 100 baseballs casually stored in an old tote bag that he kept handy for one of the many batting sessions he gave Eric and his friends. Alyssa and I were forced labor. He brought along to shag balls for the guys for hours, which was fun for the boys, but not so much fun for us on steamy summer days in North Carolina, even though Daddy tried to pretend it was a game for us. It was not a game for us. He had about 200 tennis balls in a separate canvas tote he kept when he wanted to practice his serving for hours at a time. So you can guess who got to shag those balls. Putters and golf balls littered his office and car as well, plus at least one trusty basketball, and he loved it all. For someone so handsome and talented, he was shockingly modest and humble. As he looked at some old family photos we shared with him, he recently said, "You know, I wasn't a bad-looking guy." And I told him, "No, Daddy, you're very handsome." He said, "But I never, ever thought so." And I all the little girls that Eric didn't want to play with had a crush on him, as did all the grown-up girls and friends at school and work. Father is so handsome and charming, is what everyone always said. And of course, they were right. One of my favorite stories is about his love of reading and how he fostered that in all of us. When we lived in Boston, one of my Christmas gifts from him was the original A Bear Called Paddington book. He would read it out loud to me when he got home, and it quickly became my favorite. Daddy always traveled overseas for his job. And one night, the front doorbell rang. Mother told me to go answer it, and when I did, a 2-foot bear with his trademark galoshes, red hat, and blue coat stood and greeted me by name, introducing himself. Daddy was hiding in the bushes and pretended the stuffed animal Paddington he purchased in London was alive. To my own delight. He knew how much I loved his stories, and he created something special for his daughter when he came home. I think that says a lot about him. So thank you, Daddy.
So this is called Funny Grandpa Gene Stories. This is from Patrick. Unfortunately, he was unable to make it today. Better out than I always said. Anyways, moving on. So our Grandpa Gene was known for his sense of humor that could light up a room. I have core memories of him doing something silly, like using a fart machine to prank incoming guests. He would methodically target different areas of the room where people were congregated to place a speaker. And with a swift click of a button, of course it will work right now, he could unleash the master plan. He would always let out a charming laugh and quickly blame any man in sight for his horrific sound. This would always make me burst out in laughter as I was his little accomplice, pranking those around him. I was in the receiving end of one of his sinister pranks when I was 4 years old. My mother's side of the family went to vacation to a beach house in Florida. And when Grandpa Gene was there with us one morning, he decided it was a good idea to drink coffee right before we went to the beach. As I sat on the couch in the living room, he walked towards me and began to grin deviously like a mastermind villain plotting an attack. He sat directly next to me and farted violently. It was okay. Yes. I guess it was a good life lesson for Grandpa. Don't be naive and trust your devious grandfather after he drinks coffee. Silly memories aside, something I remember most was Grandpa's extensive talent to make storytelling interesting and engaging. In all honesty, it's something that I envy about him, because every story he told was truly fascinating, although maybe a testament to his extraordinary life and his ability to make the most out of his opportunities. The way he told the engaging stories is something that I haven't seen anybody master quite like him. For instance, when I was at one of my sister's volleyball tournaments in 2019, he decided to tell me the story of how he was good friends with Irv Grossbeck, thank you, who was an owner of the Boston Celtics for several decades, and how he met and golfed with the legendary Arnold Palmer, or
dad's spirit, I will also do my best to keep this light and uplifting. And yes, in case you're wondering, I'm the one who stuck her head in the lasers at our house when I was around 7 or 8 years old. I like to say or think that that was the only time I did something so completely idiotic that I really surprised or tested my father, but that's not the case. There was the time when I was in high school and my dad was very excited and happy that I was going to start being the pitcher for my high school softball team. He decided I needed an upgrade to my glove, so he very generously, as always, purchased a brand new Mizuno glove that back in 1989 cost $100. That was an incredibly expensive glove at the time. And of course I had that for less than 1 week before I put it down on a bench inside my high school's courtyard, and I ran over to the vending machine to purchase a Snapple because those were new and everyone had to have a Snapple. I took my drink and then started talking to some friends, oblivious, and I picked up my gym bag and went to go to practice. When I got to the field about 30 minutes later, I realized, my brand new glove was gone. And I retraced my steps frantically. I put in a claim with the lost and found at the school, and the glove was never to be seen again. And I was hoping not to have to confess that to my dad, but almost as though he knew, the next time I spoke to him on the phone, he just said, "How's that new glove working out?" And I had to tell him, I'm really sorry, I lost the glove, and I couldn't finish my sentence before he immediately just yelled out, "What the hell is wrong with you, Alyssa? That was a damn fool thing to do. A damn fool thing to do. That's a damn expensive glove." Then later in the conversation, he said, quite rightly, "I will not be providing you with a market value replacement." That was a perfectly reasonable thing to say. Then there was the time when I almost totaled his Mercedes. My father, unbeknownst to him, didn't realize that although I had recently obtained my driver's license in Pittsburgh, where I lived with my mother and sisters at the time, I really had never driven a vehicle on a major highway or expressway. I had only ever driven in the parking lot of my high school or on side roads in South Park, and then the driving course itself. And somehow I miraculously passed the test the first time I took it. Well, he didn't know any of that. And I was staying in Winston-Salem with my dad and Gary before I started college. And he said, "Let's go see the movie Navy SEALs because it's out in the theater. And I know you like Charlie Sheen." And I found myself driving his car on an expressway while he was just chatting away in the passenger seat listening to some Irish or Scottish folk music. And I had a death grip on the wheel and I was sweating, and I was too afraid to tell him I'm terrified, I'm not a good driver, I should be on this road. And then, of course, realized, oh, there's our exit. So he yelled out, "Here's our, Alyssa, get off here. Here's our exit, get over to the right now." And this would be no problem at all if you were an experienced driver, but if you're a student driver, the way I was, essentially, I looked over, and as I looked over, I started auto-correcting, moving the car into oncoming traffic. So we would have had a head-on collision as our car left our lane. And thank God my dad had wonderful reflexes because he immediately reached over, grabbed the wheel, and jerked it back to the right. And that was really the only thing that prevented us from colliding head-on with another vehicle at speed, while he simultaneously yelled, "Jesus Christ, Alyssa, give me the goddamn wheel!" I somehow made it to that parking lot without actually causing a motor vehicle accident. And he wordlessly held out his hand for the keys. As I gave it to him, he just looked at me and said, "Oh, well, I thought we were going to test whether the airbags were deployed." Needless to say, I'll be driving home. And that was the last time I ever drove one of my dad's vehicles, to the relief of everyone involved. In addition to being a wonderful father to 7 children and a grandfather to 6, as others have remarked, my father had a wonderful ability to make just the right amusing or clever or witty remark or reference to things or people going on around him. From imitating perfectly my nervous mannerisms and energy while standing on the sidelines watching my son's youth soccer games and telling me, I think we need to get grandma's little rosary beads so you can nervously work them in both hands. That will be a stress release for you, to telling my sister that when she tightens up the lower part of her face and her mouth when she's either annoyed by something we're saying or doesn't want to answer a question we're asking her, he said, "You look like Mitch McConnell, Gina." It would perfectly imitate her tightening up her face, and you're like, "Mitch McConnell, are you, Mitch?" And it was perfect, and it was exactly correct. And then there was the time he told me that my husband, when he's working with my son, especially when my son was between the ages of 3 and maybe 5 years old, he said, "John reminds me of John Travolta in the movie Get Shorty." Because when he works with Sean, he's always telling him, "Look at me, Sean. Sean, look at me. Look at Sean. Look at me, Sean. Look at me. Look at me." And it was exactly correct. And my husband will still do that sometimes when he talks to my son. And I always think of my dad. And certainly when I see that movie, I think of him. He also once, when he had to carefully navigate the rather cluttered front porch of my mother's home after he attended a party there and was trying to exit, he had the perfect remark, because as he was trying to exit through the furniture and pots that cluttered her front porch, he just said, "Well, this is an intricate passage." Again, it was perfectly on point. One of my favorite remarks that he ever made was for 3 years, while I attended law school, and he would ask me over the course of those years, "What's it like? Do you have any dating prospects there?" And I would tell him, "Oh, there's this guy I run with, but he looks like Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers or Skeletor, so no. Or there's this other guy who's nice, but he has a thick unibrow, so I just think of him as the brow, so no." We were getting ready for finals, and we had to go to the law library, and the people had actually ripped out the hard copies of cases from the case reporter, so none of us could study them and prepare for our exams. And then one time I told him I was accosted by a participant in the moot court who followed me around as I was refilling the water pitchers between the rounds of competition and accused me angrily of not providing sufficient water at the tables where they were presenting their arguments to the judge. And he said, "It's my fault because he had dry cotton mouth, and had he not had dry cotton mouth, he would have won." And I would tell him all of these stories, and he would say, "You're making this up. It can't be that bad. It can't be that odd in law school." And then he attended my law school graduation, and he saw all of my classmates receive their diplomas. And as soon as the ceremony was over, and I rejoined him and my mother and siblings and aunts outside Soldiers and Sailors Memorial, he just looked at me and he said, "I have never seen a more anomalous group of people in my life." You weren't kidding. And I, of course, include myself as one of the anomalies, because I'm sorry, Gray, lawyers are a little bit weird. And I can say that about myself, but again, it was the perfect remark, and in a very humorous way captured what he had observed. I would be remiss if I failed to comment, also as Patrick and I'm sure others will do, of my father's fondness for gas. And to paraphrase from the movie A Christmas Story, our father worked in flatulence the way an artist might work in oils or clay. It was his medium, and he was a master. From telling me stories when I was little about being the mayor of Beantown, USA, to how my sisters ate giant beef burritos before all their swim meets in Massachusetts, and that's how they were able to power themselves down the lanes and win all those medals. There was not a gas joke or reference or story that he would fail to make or tell. My personal favorite occurred when the two of us went to the CVS store on Peacehaven Road for him to purchase something, and while we were there, he pulled a box of Gas-X from the shelves, and he then did an impromptu comedic narration of the directions, the warnings, and the side effects that were on the packaging of the box, including a reenactment of the claim that taking the product would cause painful gas bubbles to leave your body in pleasant, foamy cups of gas. And the two of us were laughing hysterically in the middle of CVS. I was crying, and much to the annoyance and I'm sure disgust of the poor pharmacist who was at the counter behind us. I'd like to say I was under 18 when this happened, but I was actually in my late 20s. I might have been as old as 30. But that is a testament to his comedic abilities and his talent, that he could make something like that humorous. So in honor of that spirit, I'll close with a variation of an old Gaelic prayer that my dad enjoyed, which is this. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind at your back never be your own. May the sun shine warm upon your face. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. I love you guys. You're devoted and sometimes idiotic daughter. My sister Alyssa failed to tell a story that we all thought that she would tell about my father's reaction when she was a little girl, probably around the time, the summer after she got her head stuck between the banisters. She also did say, I was down below her pushing from the first floor. My brother was cooling behind her, but also Eric told her, if they can't get your head out, they might have to cut it off. passed away, we who live up in Pittsburgh, my mother, me, my husband-in-law, were at my cousin's house for Memorial Day, and Diane asked about how Daddy was. And we told her the end was near, and Diane said, Gene was, and she paused for a minute and said, simply charming. And I thought that was a great, very short, but said so much about him. Diane is a cousin from my mother's side, so our parents, my mother has been divorced from Daddy since 1981. So they didn't see Daddy as much anymore, so had to go to weddings and things like that. But everyone on my mother's side just had great love for him. Her cousin Karen just said how he knew him as a younger girl. She just loved being around him. That his stories, he always was filled with stories that made everybody laugh, and that his wit and his warmth would stick with her forever. It's stuck with her all these years. Diane and Karen and their sister Charlotte's mother, Eleanor, who is my mother's sister, our aunt, one time was terribly, terribly sick. This was back in the 60s. On death's door, she had to be rushed back, I think, from Erie, Pennsylvania to Pittsburgh for treatment. And she'd been in the hospital, as the story goes, for a number of days. And truly, it was not known whether she would live or she would die. And after Eleanor being in the hospital for about a week, the nurses came rushing in to her room. They didn't know what in the world was going on, because they heard Eleanor laughing, and there had been no laughter in that room, and Eleanor really hadn't been conscious for a lot of the time. And the nurse came in to see, it was my father who had come into town with my mother, and he was talking to Eleanor as a German doctor with an accent, ordering her, "You will get better, I am ordering you, you will get better, you're going to leave," just being silly and making Eleanor laugh. And Daddy had that way, we all have heard funny stories about him and his wit, but he was very attuned, I think, to how people were feeling much of the time. My brother's friend Scott Jones wrote a beautiful tribute to him, about him, and said that Daddy was the father figure that he hadn't had, and that Daddy was a wonderful example of what it meant to be a father. And I think that says a lot. When somebody remembers that years later. Several of my brother's friends are here. They've come from a long way, some of them. It says a lot, I think, about how Daddy made people feel who were around him, all of our friends, all the kids' friends, enjoyed being around him, because he enjoyed people. He enjoyed children. One time, Daddy and Harriet were in Washington, D.C., and we were down on the National Mall, and the Korean War Memorial was newly opened. And there was a gentleman there who was clearly a Korean War veteran, and he was standing there amongst all the tourists, saluting the flag that's part of the memorial. And tears were streaming down this gentleman's face. And most people were just sort of staring and gawking at him as if he was part of the memorial. But my father walked up to him, put his arm around the stranger's shoulder, and I heard him telling him he knew what a horrible war had been, how people had suffered, how the soldiers, the Marines, they had suffered, and that they were truly the forgotten veterans of a forgotten war. And that just, as a young adult, emphasized to me, or re-emphasized to me, how it's okay to reach out to people, to strangers, no matter who they are or what the circumstances are, and give them a kind word, or a smile, or a hug, to touch them physically and let them know you're not alone, I see you, and you matter. And I think people have talked about how Daddy made people feel that he cared about them, that he was interested in them. He was always available to give advice. I could call him anytime, and he'd give me good advice. One time during my first marriage, I picked the phone up at work and said, hello. And all I heard on the other end was not, hello, Caroline, it's Daddy. It was, void the contract. He was telling me in his own funny way, I don't think this was a good idea. I think we should void the contract, which eventually was voided. When I was in high school and college, and Daddy would come up and visit us, my sisters and me, we were living in Pittsburgh, he'd often take me out for dinner or lunch on my own, and he would have these very serious conversations, giving me life advice and guidance, which for some reason made me very sad. First I thought, Daddy must be very sad. He must really feel like he has to take this opportunity to try to give me some guidance. But Harriet gave me letters that I'd written to my father during that time period, and I was reading them last night, and I thought, I don't think he was sad. I think he thought, I have a very odd daughter, and maybe I should take this opportunity to try to help her. I don't know. I'll close with just a couple of thoughts. In a time when honor no longer seems to have meaning for so many people, or they don't know exactly what it means, it doesn't seem to matter. I think it mattered to Daddy. And my mother, who, as I said, they've been divorced since 1981, she wanted me to tell Daddy the last time I saw him that he was a wonderful, devoted father and an honorable man. And that means a lot for my mother, to call somebody an honorable person and an honorable man. And I think it's pretty high praise from your ex-wife, whether that is how she continues to think of you as an honorable man. And I think if Daddy heard me, I think he would have been pleased. So I'll leave you with the advice he gave me in 1989 as I was getting ready to move from Pittsburgh to start my career at the FBI in Washington, D.C. He said, don't engage in office gossip, which I'm embarrassed to say I didn't always follow that one. But he said, keep your head down and your nose clean and you'll be fine. And he was absolutely right.
So the ladies pretty much said it all. That's it. I'm good. Based off of everything that was recently said about how humble and honest my father was, he was a saint. Nothing really got to him, and if it did get to him, he'd always go in his office, read a book, watch TV, and just ponder about it, and then come back the next day. It's like, hey, so this is how it is. At least with me, he was very cool, calm, and collected. So to fall back on an automotive story that Melissa had shared about her almost wrecking a vehicle of Dad's, well, I raced one of his vehicles. Okay. Can't remember what road it was. Long story short, we were just busting butt down a hill going about 90 because I was a buckhead and I didn't want this dude to pass me in a no pass zone. I was very adamant about it. Can't pass me in no pass zone. Well, as we rounded the corner, there was the Forsyth County Sheriff's Officer. Had his lights on, parked his car in the middle of the road. Probably a minute later, we finally got down to him. Luckily, I got off with a driving without a license. But he said that he was going to call my father. And let me tell you, I was scared. I was terrified. By the time I got home, I gave Dad his key back, and he's like, well, what did we learn? I didn't have words. And the only thing that he said was, Jesus Christ, Alex. One of his favorite lines. So, being humble, he was also very protective. He wouldn't let anybody talk down about the kids, talk down about the family, talk down about himself. Not so much. He would casually just sit there and take it. So, this man raised you to be what you wanted to be, which was successful and happy. One of the times I was on medication, I was on new medication, I was very young, called my mom the B word. That just grabbed me by my shirt right here, lifted me up and said, no. And let me know. That was the one time I was actually truly scared. Okay, well, going forward, I was about, what was it, 20-ish, 24? Okay, well, let's just say I was about 14 to about 20. Mom and I didn't agree with something, and it was a heated conversation. We were going back and forth. Oh. Dad peeks around his den because we were right there at the stairs. If any of y'all are familiar with the house, Denny house, we have the stairs going up by the front door. Well, Dad just peeks around his den and is like, calm down. I did not calm down. Mom and I were still going at it, and I don't know what I said. Could not tell you to this day, but next thing I know, I'm pinned up against the wall. Honestly. A lot of people may underestimate him, but that man picked me up. I was 140 pounds at the time, picked me up with one arm and dragged me up against the wall. I learned quickly. So, the person that I am today is from the patience that he had with me. And to top it all off, a man with a little phrase was one of his favorite phrases. I don't know if he said it to any of the other kids down the road.
Hi, I'm Robin. I'm Harriet's sister. And Harriet is renting my voice for the day. And because we were blessed with the same little squeaky voice. So I'd like all of you to close your eyes and just pretend when I begin that it's actually Harriet talking, because this is Harriet's speech. But I wanted to relay to you one of the first times I ever met Gene. He'd come with Harriet to San Francisco. I think it was one of the times to meet my mother and my stepfather and my father. And he took Chinese restaurant out in the avenues. And it was a big deal for me because I didn't have a lot of money and he was taking us out. And we were sitting there having a nice Chinese meal. And I noticed that he was listening and of course asking me about myself. And as he always did. And he was kind of listening out of the corner of his ear, and there's a little ruckus going on in the back of the restaurant. And he turned to us and he said, on the count of 3, I want you girls to duck your head and hit the door. And Harriet said, we haven't paid for the meal yet. We said, 1, 2, 3. And we got the heck out of there. And I was out first, so I didn't see it, but Harriet saw 2 guys with meat cleavers. Eugene was listening out of the corner of his ear to the Chinese conversation that was going on inside of the kitchen, and he knew that all hell was about to break loose. And when we got out the door, I said, what is it? And he says, keep walking, just keep walking. And I just love that, and I said, wow, he's a real G-man. Nobody else, and of course it was in the paper the next day, there was, big Chinese gang fight, etc. But Harriet, I didn't tell you I was going to say this, but in 2006, I got a phone call at my office from Eugene, and he said, your sister's very sick and she's not expected to live. And I said, I'll be on the plane. And he said, you don't have to. I said, I'll be right there. And I went into my boss's office and I said, my sister's sick. And she said, what are you doing in my office? Get the hell out of the open. And I went and I sat in Harriet's ICU room with Gene. And I watched him day after day. And every time she'd wake up, she was all connected to the machine that goes ping and all that. And telling her, every time she woke up, he'd tell her a joke. He was always there. And he would make me go home. And I had such esteem for somebody who would, and I said, that she got a good one. She really did. So now you can close your eyes, and thank God there's water there. This is Harriet saying that Eugene McCarthy I knew and loved. San Francisco and the world in the 1970s were transfixed with the phenomenon of Levi Strauss 501 denim jeans. Not only did everyone want to wear them, a lot of people also wanted to work for the company. That's where I met Eugene. We worked on opposite sides of the same floor. I in the treasurer's department, he as head of corporate security. I did his travel advances, some of his travel arrangements, and reconciled his reports when he returned from his many trips to the southern states and overseas. In typical Eugene fashion, he was always the polite gentleman with a twist of Irish humor, ready with a smile and intelligent conversation. Everyone in the building admired him because he was respectful and considerate to everyone. In 1974, he left Levi Strauss and moved to Boston to work for the Gillette Company. I still remember the funereal atmosphere in the building the day he resigned. It was like losing a family member, but he was too substantial a person to be out of sight, out of mind. And so several of us stayed connected with him sporadically over the years and knew his whereabouts. We also knew how good he was at what he did, and if any of us needed serious help, he would be the person to call. That need came for me in May of 1987 when I was living and working in New York City and embroiled in a very acrimonious divorce from a dangerous and disturbed ex-husband. Eugene had moved from Gillette to R.J. Reynolds in the late 70s, so I took a chance and reached out hoping to find him still working in Winston-Salem. That turned out to be the most life-altering phone call I've ever made. His advice was pitch perfect. He gave me valuable intelligence and he helped me navigate what can often be the impossible process of separating from a spouse in one of the most expensive cities in the world. I was his damsel in distress, and he was my handsome knight in a Brooks Brothers suit. safety and my refuge with the promise of becoming part of the family he loved so much. By September of that year, I had escaped New York and was part of his life. We were married December 1st. All this is to say I've known Eugene for a very long time. Sorry, Harry. Trying to get through this. I always understood that the most important people in his life were his children. He absolutely doted on them. I also came to appreciate him for being a caring, committed son who loved and respected his own parents and his former in-laws, all of whom were undoubtedly models for his own behavior. I appreciated early on that I had married one of the best fathers and sons imaginable. Eugene's 4 children were beyond the age of childhood by that December, off to college and in the military and living in other states. He and I were both past our best before dates for having children. He was 51 and I was 41. Yet both of us longed to be parents together. Adoption was the only way to make that possible. But America's maximum age of adoptive parents was 35 at that time. So Eugene got to work investigating Korean and South American possibilities with his still active contacts over there. For a few years, we had only disappointing hopes. Then in early 1993, Eugene was listening to NPR one morning, and Ann Garrels did a story about Russia just having opened to foreign parents who were willing to adopt one of their children. Eugene, in typical fashion, organized everything before giving me the news, but we were in Washington, D.C. and being screened as potential adoptive parents within days of that report. We brought Leonti home with us in the summer of 1993, and he was such a delight to have as part of our family that we decided to adopt again in 1996. That second time, the agency sent us 2 dossiers, and I was faced with a Sophie's Choice decision, which I found impossible to make. No problem, says Eugene. Let's just adopt both of them. My response was, what are you, nuts? But he wasn't nuts, he was just Eugene, and he'd already made room in his heart for 2 more. Many of you know the rest of the story. Eugene shepherded these 3 Russian boys through their childhood, encouraging them to do their best, even in the face of sometimes daunting emotional and intellectual challenges. All graduated from high school, 2 graduated from college, along with their successful stepbrothers and sisters. One of them is the best chef in the family. Each is a productive citizen making life better for others. All had the benefits of 2 parents who loved them unconditionally and loved each other. In the end, it was the cohesiveness and love of his family that helped Eugene navigate the last 11 years with a devastating and lethal illness. He soldiered on for his 7 children, very seldom ever complaining, except to me, of course, in which he inevitably addressed me as Nurse Ratchet when I fell out of the cuckoo's nest. Instead, presenting a positive spin on a very difficult disease and the accompanying side effects of the chemotherapy keeping him alive. He had an unerring ability to mask his fatigue and pain with his incredibly mellifluous voice. We all thought he missed a calling as a radio or TV announcer. So the out-of-town children were shielded from how difficult life was becoming for him. Then earlier this year, when it was clear he had exhausted almost all medical intervention keeping him alive, and had entered that final revolving door of inpatient, rehab, home, health, inpatient, rinse, repeat, he made the decision to discontinue further treatment the next time he became critically ill, knowing the full impact of what that would mean. We all honored and supported his decision to choose quality of life. That end of care day came 6 weeks ago after a last visit to the ER, and he voluntarily entered palliative care. He asked me to contact the children living outside Winston to come and be with him in his final days, and they did come, all of them, so many times. They were all there with him, taking shifts with me during those final 3 weeks, night and day in hospice, and I know that gave Eugene tremendous comfort. He spent his last lucid hours telling us over and over how much he loved us. But we already knew because he told us all the time. We all fully grasped what an irreplaceable treasure we were losing. Eugene died as he lived. He faced it head on with his signature equanimity, courage, and the gratitude of having lived as long and as well as possible with a fatal diagnosis. To the end, he was implicitly trusting and devoted husband, responsible and loving father, dynamic and interesting friend, caring mentor, competitive golf buddy, and all-around good guy. He left nothing on the field. He literally ran out of life. He lived for his family and knew how blessed he was to die surrounded by all of us who loved him with such a fierce determination and loyalty. Now it is up to those of us left here behind to embrace the wonderful lesson he taught us and the legacy of decency and responsibility he imparted to us. He was totally unique. I always said he must have been a prototype that turned out to be much too expensive and difficult to reproduce because they already made one. I doubt any of us will see his singular blend of deep devotion to family and country, deadpan seriousness, gentle puckishness, marvelous sense of humor, captivating intellect, penchant for obscure detail, together with a heart brimming with protectiveness and generosity for the people he loved ever again. Harriet McCarthy. And I thank you for letting me read that. That was a gift to me.
It's only harder to follow Harriet than it is to follow Ray Charles. Thank you both for bringing to our minds the great love affair. I have a couple of things I need to say here. I hope you'll indulge me. One of them is, I'm going to pat myself on the back. For the first time in my life, I said the right thing to somebody. Years ago, and Alex will be the one who can tell me what year it was, he was qualified for emergency medical technician. And Eugene called me to tell me the news. He was so proud. And I said, Eugene, he's in the family tradition of public service. And that was the one right thing I managed to say in my entire lifetime. And he was so proud. Out of all this trouble, you struggled with it. I was in there all the way at times. And it's just terrific. So, thank you. Now, the romance. Let me tell you about the romance, okay? So Harriet and Gene and I go to the San Juan Islands up off of Seattle, out in the water out there. You know, it's going to be a lot of hiking and maybe some bicycle riding and all that sort of stuff. Well, not exactly, because Gene and I discovered it was pie season. Well, apparently, on the San Juan Islands, the lawberry, blackberry, blueberry, any berry you can name, they all get ripe at the same time. Now, what were Gene and I to do? What we're going to have a piece of lawberry, a piece of blackberry pie, and not try any of the others. So it became kind of an eat-a-thon. Eat-a-thon. But Gene was romantically attentive to Harriet, that's always. Then, another occasion, the four of us went to Lago beautiful big lake. We stayed in a wonderful hotel on the shore with a beautiful terrace where we had our breakfast in the morning, looking out over the water. And Harriet had arranged for a boat that goes out into the lake, takes you around, calls on these various little islands, and you have lunch on one of the islands, and I was sure it was going to be a very romantic setting. So it came, I don't know, 11:30, whatever time it was. We got down to the lobby. Karen and I did. My favorite wife, Karen, was with me then, as she is today. In any case, we get down the lobby, and there's Harriet all by herself. So, where's Gene? Anybody like to hazard a guess? Exactly. He had found up the hill, about 5 miles up into the mountains, there was an Italian golf course, and he was determined that he was going to play it. Now, that evening, he came back, regaled us with all the great stories that his new Italian friends that he made on the course, and how funny they are to play. The Italians are playing golf. And we had a lovely dinner. But I thought to myself, it was just a little insight into the tug and pull of romance and golf. Excuse me. We also had to talk about Eric. Eric had a distinguished career in the FBI, as most of you know. And many people attributed that to the excellent training that the FBI provided, the experiences he had, and how he learned from them and rose up in the ranks. But I'm here to tell you it was entirely genetics. Complete genetics. And I'm going to give you one example, and I'm sure you agree with me. Before Eric had any thought of the possibility of his being an FBI agent, he was working in private security in Southern California. Karen and I then had, Karen's my favorite wife. We had Dodger tickets, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to take her to a game? So we went down to the game, and we got there a little early, as was our custom. And I said to Karen, honey, I'm going to predict where we're going to find Eric. She said, what do you mean? He'll be in the seat. You gave him the ticket already. I said, no. He'll be standing up at the top of the seats, the next aisle over, watching our seats, so he can put us under surveillance for a while before he comes down and introduces himself. Sure enough, there he was. So that's my proof. Genetics is the thing. Sorry about that, Eric. You know, everybody else gives you credit for a distinguished career. I can't do it. I just can't do it. Now, everybody talks about Gene and his memory and his success in our work together, the counterintelligence, counterespionage stuff. Years later, we're both as retired as we could be. We go to a baseball game in Washington, D.C. I know that's unheard of because the Boston Red Sox at that time didn't play there. National League field. Evil. And anyhow, we decided to do that. And while we were there, we thought, why don't we go to the Spy Museum? So we went to the Spy Museum. And it's nice. If any of you have any interest in your Indian district, it's a good place and it has a lot of excellent exhibits. But while we're walking along a dark hall, Gene says to me, Ed, that's General Kaluga. I said, General who? My field was exclusively Chinese. General Kaluga, it turns out, was a famous former KGB officer who defected to the United States, wrote a best-selling book about it. And Gene hadn't seen that guy for comes out? General Kaluga. Gene introduces himself, and they have the best time. I'm observing. They have the best time. It's like two old bros chatting each other up. You know, now on the same side, finally both retired, but formerly great foes, one representing the Soviet Union, one representing the United States. So, Gene's knowledge was not only encyclopedic, but so was his memory. His memory was also encyclopedic. And don't forget, he was also, because of his position in Reynolds, one of the high-ranking bucks at the Dinah Shore Golf Tournament in Palm Springs. And he had more fun there than you could imagine, because he was on the job, being paid to spend all his time for this entire week or however the tournament was at a golf tournament. What a deal. Now, one of my assignments for this last moment here today is to tell you what to do next, but my staff did not tell me. So I'm going to call on someone else to do that. I think Alex would be the guy for it. But I just want to leave you with one personal observation. You want to know who Gene was thinking about in his life? He was thinking about you. All of you, all of us, and many others who were blessed by his presence, whatever world he bring into the name. And it's not the worst way to spend your life like that, particularly when you can make most of them smile and laugh. So I hope you'll keep that memory with me. I think the only appropriate thing would be to have an annual gathering in his honor. But I'll leave that to others. Now let's come up, give the real information.